Hi guys, hope you're all having a good week. So you probably can tell that I'm on my own today, and unfortunately Curtis was unable to be here to record this month's podcast. But fear not, I have made sure that we have another guest speaker in place of Curtis just for the time being. So if you keep in tune and keep watching, you will see the podcast interview with the lovely Mark Fosbrook as part of inclusion, which is a topic for this month's podcast, with Commonwealth Games coming up at the end of July. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, Mark. As I've just mentioned, Curtis isn't actually available, but obviously Commonwealth Games is coming up at the end of this month in July, and I thought it would be really good to talk about inclusion, really. So first off, can you just tell us a little bit about you, please?
So my name's Mark Fosbrook. I'm currently on secondment at the West Midlands Combined Authority as the Include Me West Midlands manager. And that's looking at how we make the West Midlands an exemplary region in engaging disabled people and those with long-term health conditions to be physically active. I come from Activity Alliance, which is obviously also an organisation that's leading around sport and physical activity and reducing the fairness gap and creating a fairness for disabled people. And I suppose personally myself, as a disabled person born with my disability, having been fairly successful in sport, I've got a real passion for promoting sport and physical activity to anyone, but also how we can make it more inclusive and engaging for disabled people.
And I suppose the next question really is, if you don't mind me asking, what is your disability? Can you give us a bit of an overview of like how that might affect you on a day-to-day basis and the barriers that you might face?
Yeah, so I'm it's technically called ectrodactyly, which is a failure of formation of some of the extremities. Basically, I'm a class as a double below knee amputee, so I haven't got any feet or ankles, and then I have two fingers on each hand, so sort of no real wrist joint, the fingers sort of just attached straight to the end. And yeah, there's definitely day-to-day challenges, you know, in this heat. My legs feel very hot, mind you, everyone feels very hot at the moment. So I have to think about how far and what I'm doing in terms of walking and my legs rubbing, in terms of my hands and picking up sort of hot plates and saucepans and things like that. I need to be careful because I could potentially drop them, which obviously when I'm in my wheelchair at home can make things a bit more difficult. And then things like button-fly jeans and doing up my top button on my collar also prove a bit of a challenge with my two fingers as well. But I think over the years, I mean, I was born with it, so I've never known any different. So I've learned to adapt and change and look at either alternative ways of doing things or finding different things to do anyway.
And I think that sort of goes part and parcel, because I know that we had a meeting together a couple of days ago now about talking about being a bit more creative really in our mindset, because we're always having to think about how can I adapt this in order to enable me to do that. And I guess that would sort of lead me on to the next question, with it being Disability Pride Month throughout July, is what makes you proud to have your disability?
Here's an interesting one, because people always ask, you know, if you didn't have to have your disability, would you not have it? And I'm like, well, no, actually, I'm really happy. It's made me the person I am. I've been fortunate enough to travel the world and represent my country in 3 sports. And actually, it's also given me a great deal of other skills that I've transferred into the working environment. So the resilience that I have because of the attitudes and behaviours of people and the way in which they have treated me. You know, growing up, you know, I used to have people taking the mickey out of me. I used to have people staring at me, and it just made me very resilient. The empathy, because of understanding the position I'm in, you know, although I don't necessarily know exactly the issues of other people and the challenges that they face, it gives me a greater level of empathy to look through the lens of them and and appreciate what some of those challenges might be. My timekeeping, because of having to plan out my day and consider, how long is it going to take me to put my legs on? If I've got to get there and my leg's going to rub, I'm going to have to stop and rest and all those kind of things. And then the adaptability, because inevitably things go wrong. You get a puncture in your wheelchair, your leg does rub when you haven't expected it to, or it breaks or something else. So having those 4 skills as a disabled person, most disabled people have those skills, but most disabled people also don't realise that they're very valuable skills in the workplace. And if you can learn to transfer those skills into that working environment, most employers will look to bite your hand off. So I think it gives me as a person a lot of advantages.
Definitely. And in actual fact, it's quite interesting that you just touched on employment, because as you know, and as I'm well aware, and a lot of other people are aware who have a disability or long-term health condition, finding employment is actually a really, really difficult task, isn't it? And I actually had a meeting with a lovely organisation in Worcestershire called ASPI. And one individual had actually asked me, because he's looking for work at the moment, and he was asking about sort of what does he do when he's applying for these roles. And it actually leads to a question of, do you actually disclose your disability or don't you? So I'd be interested to know what would your advice be on that point?
I mean, it's obviously all down to personal preference and how comfortable you are. I think for me, I'm always very open. I wear shorts when I'm out and about as much as I can to show my disability off, so that people can see someone that's out there doing things, working in an environment that there aren't necessarily that many disabled people in, so that hopefully in the future people think, well, maybe I could do that. So I suppose along that vein, I've always been very open about disclosing my disability, because for me, I feel it's a real advantage and actually can bring an awful lot to an organisation. A lot of people won't agree with me and won't feel that and want to hide it away. And that's, I suppose, where some of our work with Include Me is working with organisations to help them think about how they engage better with disabled people, how they can be more inclusive in their recruitment practices and then in their employment, and how they support disabled people to be open, because actually if you're hiding an impairment away, or you're hiding your sexuality away, or you're hiding something else away, you're not bringing your full self to work. And actually, as soon as you can be your full self and not be hiding things on a daily basis, it makes you far more productive. So for me, I'm always open from the outset and see it as a value. In terms of, one thing I struggle with, I suppose, is where you fill out an application form and it says, we guarantee to give a disabled person an interview if you achieve the minimum criteria. Tick here if you feel you should have an interview. And I struggle with that. I struggle to tick that box, because if I tick that box, I'm then going to the interview thinking, are they interviewing me because I've ticked the box and actually they don't really want me? Whereas I'd rather them see in my application that I have a disability, but then also go, actually, this guy is really good. We want him, or at least we want to see what he's about. Let's interview him, because then that just means that I'm going, and I feel that I'm going on my merit, which is what I want to be assessed on. I don't want to be a tick box to go, oh yeah, we've got to interview people that have got a disability, so we'll just bring him along. I want to be, I'm applying for the job because I know I have the skills, I know I have the quality to bring value to that organisation, and that's what I want to be interviewed on, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think I have a very similar outlook on that in that regard to you. Whenever I've applied for any jobs, I've always disclosed it. I haven't necessarily put it in the actual block if you have a disability, let us know. I've always made sure that I've put it somewhere in my application form though, so that it actually shows actually I've acquired these skills as a result of having my disability, because I'm far more resilient. I've got a harder work ethic because I'm used to having to work harder to find my own way around doing different things that I can't do in a conventional way or anything. And my outlook is, if someone doesn't like me or doesn't want to give me an interview based on my disability, that's not someone that I want to work for anyway. And I think just with you touching on the fact, obviously, making sure that you can be your full self, and being really open about it. I think it's not been until I've worked here at Midland Mencap actually that I've understood the true meaning of that, because I've always been open about my disability. But like in terms of my autism, which is as a result of the main disability, like things such as travelling can get quite stressful if I don't know where I'm going. And it's been lovely because right from the offset here, I've managed to be able to be completely upfront, and I've said, these are my issues. How can we work on them together? And actually, collectively, we've gone at it from a solution-orientated approach, and we found those solutions very early on rather than me hiding it, which I think has been really productive. And I think the only thing that I'm probably not quite as good at in an interview is actually being upfront and actually asking what type of reasonable adjustments that potential employer would be able to facilitate me with, because I don't want someone to make a decision on me with that prejudice of my disability. I want them to make that decision on me based on my capability and my ability to be able to fulfill that role to the best of my abilities, rather than thinking what reasonable adjustments are going to have to put in place. So I always wait until I've been offered the job to actually come out with those questions. And I know that some people would prefer to do it beforehand, but that's just sort of my way of doing it. And I always find that that's always worked for me. Now, obviously, we've been talking a bit about Include Me, and it's something that both myself and you work on. And I know that whilst quite a lot of people listening to this interview today are probably aware of Include Me, some people won't be. So I've got a quick task for you. In 2 minutes, can you just briefly describe what Include Me is, please?
Oh, challenge now, 2 minutes. Okay, so Include Me is looking at how we make the West Midlands a better place for disabled people, and how we can make physical activity that viable option for them. And we do that in a number of ways. So looking at working with organisations on how they engage better with disabled people and helping them improve them as an organisation, as individuals within that. We're looking at how we place disabled citizens at the heart of the conversation by the development of the Citizens Network and the panel that can inform and get all that information in a collective way to help us with recommendations for changing, adapting policy processes, organisations, etc., to make it better for that individual. And then there's other elements as well where we've supported health and social care to be better at how they refer disabled people to physical activity, where we've looked at making transport, public transport, more accessible for disabled people, and also active travel with the adapted cycles. But that's that whole idea of this is it's a social movement of change. It's looking at how we can all come together in a collective space to have a greater voice and to move that dial and make the West Midlands feel like a fantastic place to come into. And now we're starting to continue to expand and grow that and moving even wider than physical activity, and starting to change that narrative from not just being included as part of me, but also how you can play your part, and we've got loads of issues at the moment across the country, whether that's the cost of living crisis, whether that's, looking at how we achieve net zero, but it's how now as disabled people, we can play our part in that change, not just please come and include me and let me sit around the table.
Definitely. And if I was to ask you as a business or an individual, why should I be involved in Include Me? What would your reason be?
Lots of reasons. From a business perspective, if you have got a more inclusive organisation and you are open to a wider audience, it makes financial sense for you because there's, disabled people and their disposable income equates to something like £268 billion a year. So why would you not want a part of that? Equal to that, actually, we know the health inequalities of disabled people and the way in which disabled people have been forgotten about over the pandemic and the gap that they face and so many additional barriers. So actually, just as a citizen, wanting to do better, wanting to make sure that we've got an equal, fair society, there's that moral perspective as well. From an individual's point of view, for so long, disabled people have tried to have a voice and been shut down, or they've shared their concerns and they've been batted away. Well, actually, this is hopefully looking at how we create that collective voice. And the collective power of that social movement means that it's far more likely that people will need to take stock and listen. And we need to look at how we reduce those inequalities by looking at the services we get, the system that we're part of, and how we change those values and attitudes and behaviours of society. And if we can do that all together, it will make the West Midlands a far better place to be.
Definitely. And I think it's all around the importance, isn't it, of actually opening up to have those conversations between citizens with a lived experience and organisations. Because the one thing I always say when I'm talking about Include Me and getting people involved in the Citizens Network is, organisations aren't going to know how to make things more accessible because they haven't got the lived experience, which you can't not knock them. You can't knock them for that, really, can you? But how are they going to be more aware, more accessible, and overall more inclusive going forward unless they have that conversation? And that's where we come in with people with a lived experience to be able to open up that line of conversation, to be able to say, this is what we find difficult based on our lived experience, and actually go at it with a solution-orientated approach rather than saying this is wrong. But actually we're going, you know what, this isn't great for us. But in our opinion, based on our lived experience of someone who is a wheelchair user, someone who is hard of hearing, someone who has sight loss, and all other different disabilities or long-term health conditions, it could be someone who has autism, for example, this is what our recommendation would be in order to make sure that you are more accessible and inclusive across the board of disabilities and long-term health conditions.
We're all human beings. We've all got our ideas and thoughts and opinions. And, right back at the start of Include Me, we very much had that. We very much had all those worries, issues and concerns, but equal to that, ideas, thoughts and solutions. And that really started to help shape it. And if you're listening to this and you haven't got a disability and you think, well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by this, then I look at it as, imagine you've gone out in your car today and you're driving down the road and you see some roadworks and you look at those roadworks and gone, well, why have they put those lights there, or why have they done that in that way? And we see that all the time. And you go, well, if they'd have done that there and put that over there and had done this, it would have made it far better for everybody, and there would have been a lot less congestion. And it's exactly that same way. Is disabled people have that experience to go, actually, what you're doing there isn't ideal, isn't perfect, isn't great for me. But if you did this, this, and this, it would make it far better for me. And that, by bringing that collective voice together, enables us to help organisations think and consider what they want to do, rather than just trying to stab at the dark or making a guess on what's better for people when they don't really have that experience.
And I guess that sort of brings us on to another question, which actually is one that Curtis really wanted to ask you. And obviously, unfortunately, he wasn't able to be here today. And that was, can you give an example of when something wasn't inclusive or accessible for you? And how did you deal with that?
I suppose growing up, there was, obviously Equality Act and Disability Discrimination Act have been around for a long time. But, although I don't look it, I'm a little bit older than yourself, Ash, and I've been around for quite a while. So growing up, I'd go out to nightclubs and pubs and things, and the disabled toilets would quite often be a storage room for other things, whether that was the chairs for outside or just boxes or whatever. So I suppose that was just a common occurrence for me. And I suppose I'm fairly fortunate in that when I go out in my wheelchair, I wear knee pads and I can get out and jump around and crawl around if I need to. And some places didn't even have an accessible toilet. And I really remember many occasions, and it's horrible to think of it now, of going out and having to get out of my chair to crawl into the toilets on my knees, which, if you ever go out clubbing, the state of the floor, especially in the smelly men's toilets as the night goes on, not always the nicest, but, needs must. And there wasn't that option. So I suppose that was an occasion that, I just got on with it and just dealt with it because that's how it was. And it's now that I'm older and we've evolved a bit more as a society and a bit more understanding. And actually, there's far more people like you and I that are able and fortunate enough to be in a position to have a bit of a voice to challenge some of that and to question that this shouldn't be the case. So we don't see as much now. There's still a long way to go. And I'm always saying that I'm trying to do myself out of a job because, we want to get to this point of a fairness for disabled people. And actually, when we look at the social model, if society didn't disable us and the attitudes and the barriers that are put in our way, we actually wouldn't be disabled as such. So if we can get to that point, there's no need for the work that I'm doing. Unfortunately, I think I'm pretty much safe for a long time, but I'd love to be proven wrong.
And I suppose I'd like your thoughts. I mean, you've just touched on looking back and looking at how inaccessible certain things were and everything. And I know from my point of view, whilst we're still not where we need to be in terms of accessibility or inclusion, I feel like it has improved. I was just wondering, what things that you've noticed over the years that you think have actually got a bit better and made things a bit easier, if any, for you?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's when you look back, and you look back sort of before the Disability Discrimination Act, and you hear, and you look at the history of disability and the way in which people were treated in this country and put into institutions or hidden away. And we've come such a long way. And I think although quite a lot of us will look and say, it's not good enough yet, we're not there, we're not at a position where we feel we should be, especially when you look, over the last 10, 20 years and say, actually, how far have we come? And, I think, unfortunately, the pandemic highlighted a lot of inequalities for disabled people. A lot of people felt that they were left behind, weren't supported, weren't looked after. We look at the number of deaths as a part of COVID, 6 in 10 deaths were disabled people in this country. And you go, well, have we actually come that far? But we have come an awful long way. It's very far from where we want it to be, but we are on a journey. Yes, we've probably had a little bit of a slip back as a result of the pandemic, but equal to that, we've also had a greater level of awareness. People have started to realise that actually there is a lot of inequality out there and actually things need to be done. So, we've noticed, whether it's through my Include Me work with the Combined Authority or whether it's through Activity Alliance, that there are far more individuals and organisations saying, actually, we need to do more. This isn't good enough. I wasn't aware that disabled people were treated how they were over the pandemic, and we need to do more. So I think there is a real shift, and I'd like to think, over the next 5 years, we'll see some significant changes, because it really feels like we're on that tipping point of making significant change. And, you now just need to go onto social media and look at how many disabled advocates there are, influencers there are, that are really getting their voice out there and getting heard, to know that things are changing. And, and just within the combined authority, having my role and them exploring how they develop and expand that for the future. And one idea at the moment that is being explored is a regional strategy for disabled people that will benefit the people in the region. And actually, they're looking at how they invest in that. And discussions are, this is something we should just be doing. Now, that's massive, to have a combined authority looking at how they specifically invest in disabled people to reduce those inequalities, and having that kind of position and opportunity should see some massive change across the region.
Definitely, I completely agree. And I think as well, it's important, whilst we're on the topic of Include Me, to actually find out, what does the word inclusion mean to you?
So what does inclusion mean to me? To me, inclusion is about everyone having the opportunity to do what they want and the choice that they want. It's not about equality and everyone having exactly the same opportunity. It's about understanding it from an equitable point of view, in a way in which we know that some people need more just to achieve the same outcomes. But actually, everyone is treated with a fairness to enable them to have those same opportunities and those same choices. And if we can get to that point where disabled people feel like they've got that fairness, they feel like they've got that opportunity, and it's not just a one-off, it's, well, actually, I don't want to do that, but I want to do this, and they've got that choice, then for me, that's an inclusion element that needs to be looked at and addressed.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I think, obviously, with the Commonwealth Games coming up, I think it would be only fair to explore your sort of list of achievements in terms of your sports. So can you just tell us a bit about what sports you've done and also at the level you've competed as well?
Okay. So I've always loved sport right from a young age. So every half term, every summer holiday, I'd go off and play all different sports. I went through mainstream education and I was lucky enough to represent my school in hockey as a goalkeeper. And also I'm from Portsmouth originally, so represented Portsmouth in hockey as well. I did athletics. I started playing wheelchair basketball. And then I discovered when I was at university, the opportunity to play, or just before university, to play volleyball. So I was lucky enough to make it into the Great Britain team and went out to the Atlanta Paralympics in '96 playing volleyball. I then was hoping to get into the team for Sydney, but we weren't classed as medal-winning contenders. So we weren't, although we qualified, we weren't funded. So we didn't go out as part of the GB team for that. After that, it got removed as a Paralympic sport, or the standing version, which is what I played. So I then looked at other options and discovered, or I had discovered in Atlanta, wheelchair rugby. And I'd never really thought anything of it. But I was, at that point, I was working as a lecturer running a sports department for a college for students with physical disabilities and acquired brain injuries, and thought, I should check out what this wheelchair rugby is about, if anything, just to be able to teach it to the students. And found out that actually I'd qualify, and actually I was pretty good because I'd already was playing a lot of wheelchair sport and I had a lot of transferable skills. So I pretty much made it straight into the Great Britain team. And I was sort of heralded as the greatest thing since whenever, and that I was going to be this amazing superstar and we were going to win all these gold medals. Unfortunately, classification issues meant that I got deemed ineligible. So I missed out on going to Athens. We then carried on trying to sort it. I then became their performance director. And it wasn't resolved by the time of Beijing. So went out as their team manager and as a little bit of a training buddy, because there was a player very similar to me from Australia who did classify. So they used me as a bit of a training tool. After that, it was apparent that my classification was never going to be resolved, even though the Australian kid and I had sort of compared our disabilities and we couldn't really see why he was eligible and I wasn't. So I then transferred over to wheelchair basketball, where I eventually broke into the team for the World Championships, then went to European Championships, which we won and qualified for Rio. Unfortunately, then I got a new chair and was still getting used to it, and ruined my chances for making the team for Rio, so dropped to first reserve. Had sort of considered potentially retiring after Rio, but obviously because I hadn't made it, I didn't want to. I wanted to prove that I should still be in the squad. So fought my way back into the team and went out to the Europeans the following year. And then after that, we were leading up to the World Championships, where we were predicted to potentially win a gold medal. And that's when this opportunity for Include Me came around. And I made the choice that one day, apart from, the obvious of missing my family quite a lot, of being away, and my young children were starting to get a little bit older, the other real sort of turning point for me, I'd always wanted to chase winning a medal for myself and what that was worth and the value and the effort and hard work that I put into it. And suddenly the opportunity to potentially enable thousands of other disabled people to just be a bit more active and have a better quality of life as a result of that suddenly sat far better with me. So I decided to retire and come on this secondment. And the team went and won a gold medal. And only a little bit of me felt, would have loved to have that. But most of me went, no, you're in the right place. You're doing what you should be doing to make a difference to other people. And that's what I've continued to strive and believe in, is how can I make the West Midlands better for disabled people so they've got a better quality of life, whether they want to be physically active or not, that actually we're now starting to look at how we can make it just a better place to live, so that when you're moving around, you go, do you know what? It feels different here. It feels better. And that's what really keeps driving me forward now.
Yeah. And I think it's really interesting that you say that about the sort of, going for your own gold and actually having that sense of achievement and enjoying what you do as a job. Because similar to you, obviously, I was involved in sport quite a lot. I was riding from 7. I was actually on Team GB as well. And at one point I was actually aiming for 2024 Paralympic Games. And I'd actually brought my 2024 Paralympic prospect horse. And unfortunately, equestrian is one of those sports that, it's really difficult because the horse is technically classed as an athlete as well. So you've got to look after them, but they could acquire any injury just like that. And it just so happened that this horse that I had really didn't work for me, really didn't like him. He didn't like me and everything. We just couldn't get on. Tried selling him and I couldn't. So just before the first lockdown, I ended up just cutting my losses and giving him away. Which has obviously left me with no funds to get a new one. So I think that had left me at the beginning of the first lockdown in a really vulnerable position, really, because I've been doing that for most of my life. And I think sport, and I don't know whether you agree with this, it's defined me with who I am as a person in a lot of really strong ways, with developing various skills. So I was really afraid of not having the riding. What is that going to mean for me as a person? I'm not going to enjoy work as much as what I do with my professional sport and everything. So I was really, really worried. And it just so happened that I was actually made redundant at that point in time as well. So I was looking for all different job opportunities and everything, which is where Midland Mencap came along with Include Me. And I think it's really true what they say, isn't it? In terms of if you get a job you love, it doesn't feel like work. And I honestly can say that the fulfillment that I get out of my job, you know, equates to exactly the same type of fulfillment that I had when I was competing, representing my country and everything. So I think actually it is really rewarding, isn't it, to be in this line of work when we've been given the opportunities that we've had and we've been so fortunate and even successful, and we're being able to give back a little bit in terms of what we've been given, aren't we?
I think you're absolutely right. And I think, you know, in terms of what the power of sport and activity and what it can bring, you know, apart from the well-being, apart from the improved fitness, apart from, you know, added strength, apart from, you know, that social interaction and meeting with others and having that social aspect of it, which are all massively important. And if you're not that active and you're out there now listening, that's some of the benefit and worth and value that activity can bring to you. And there's an opportunity for anyone to do it. It doesn't matter. And it doesn't need to be you working towards being a Paralympic athlete. It just needs to be about you moving more and enjoying it and getting to meet other people in a like-minded way. Then you can have that social interaction. You can improve your well-being. And, you know, I know people that, you know, struggled to transfer out of their wheelchair into their car independently or struggled carrying bags home. And then by playing activity, they can now transfer themselves into their own car and put their wheelchair in. So they're now independent. They can go off and do things. So the power of sport is massive. But like we were talking earlier on around the employment point, you know, why would I not put on an application form that I represent in my country for Great Britain in my sport? Because actually the extra ethos around that hard work and the training and the hours of dedication and that competitive nature and the not wanting to fail and always striving for the best performance and to be the best individual you can be is, again, a massive benefit in the working environment. So I think, you know, there are a lot of athletes as they either decide not to pursue a career or they retire from their sport, wonder how they're going to transition into that working environment. And actually, there's a lot of similarity. You can be that driven, motivated, you know, competitive person, if you want, in the working environment. But also it gives you those other skills about the resilience and things we spoke earlier on. So for me, I think whatever your passion is, whether it's physical activity or something else, always look at how the skills you've developed through that passion can be transferred into that working environment, because most things can. I just think personally, physical activity beats all of those because, one, I enjoy it, but two, actually it makes you fitter, healthier and stronger as well.
Definitely. And I think a really good prime example of everything that you've just said is actually, and I don't know whether you know him, he's in his wheelchair athletics, Mickey Bushell.
Yeah, I know Mickey well.
And he's actually doing a really interesting project over in Telford at the moment. Yep. So he's teaching people who are wheelchair users like valuable skills so that they can transfer from the wheelchairs and everything. And I was actually looking at his social media the other week. Hold on. And it was really, really interesting because is really showing people how to transfer from those different places, which is fantastic to see. So the last question that I just wanted to leave us all with really is, what's been your most memorable achievement? And it could be anything, throughout your sport or throughout Include Me. What's something that you are most proud of?
I always struggle with this because there's several. Obviously, the memories I have of going to my first Paralympics, and I remember very clearly still just walking out. We stood around for ages waiting for us to go into the opening ceremony, and you could hear the crowds and whatever. And I was just thinking, okay, we'll go in there, we'll do this. I'll go back to the village, get some food, get to bed, and then we'll start competing the next day. And then I remember walking out into the stadium and, it just hit me. It was amazing. It was just a feeling of everyone in that stadium cheering me on and cheering all the other athletes on. And I think I ran around a bit like a headless chicken, just absolutely ecstatic. So I think that for me, that whole experience of, then competing and then people queuing to get my autograph and going, I bet you get this all the time back home. And I was like, no, really, I don't. I'm just a general person no one ever bats an eyelid at. Through to then the closing ceremony of that, where I was then on a stage, a little platform in front of a crowd of people where I'd met some people and they were chanting my name. And the whole section of that crowd started chanting my name. There is another story with that where the Macarena then came on, and apparently there's reports of me doing the Macarena on stage in front of the stadium, but there's luckily no video evidence of that, so it never happened. So that's probably my greatest achievement, was that first experience. But then, any time I pulled on a jersey to represent my country was massive for me. The Europeans in Worcester and my family were there to watch us win gold, was amazing. But then that other thing, is the non-sporting side of things. And my family, is massively important to me. My two young boys, having them is, a fantastic achievement. Having battled through with my wife for a stillborn daughter back in 2010, when we sort of found out full term on Christmas Day, one of the worst times in my life. But it's really demonstrated and shown how you can turn things around, and how, then having those two boys since has really made that special. So, yeah, I suppose it's probably those two things that are the most stand out for me. But then I suppose from other disability point of view in the region is what I'm now doing, and where, the opportunities are now starting to open up for the future. And, if I can just make one person's life a bit better, then that's a better achievement probably than anything else. Because everyone's so valuable, everyone means so much, regardless of a disability, regardless of their gender, regardless of their age, regardless of their sexuality, their race, anything. Everyone is equal and everyone should be treated fairly. And if I can help play a small part in that, then, that's what I want from being a human being.
Definitely. Well, thank you for taking the time to speak with me today, Mark. It's been really interesting, and I think it's been great in the whole of the 18 months that we've been working together. It's probably the first opportunity that we've actually been able to sit down and have a proper conversation and talk to each other on a bit of a different level as well. So thank you for taking the time to speak with me today. And I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
Yeah, and you. Thank you.
So in last month's podcast, we had asked you guys the question, with Disability Pride Month coming up in July, what makes you proud to be disabled? And actually some of your feedback was really interesting and lovely to actually watch, really. Someone had said that they were proud to have their disability because it makes them unique. Others had said that it was the fact that it was what enabled them to get their job, and that's why they're proud to be disabled. And others have just said it's because it's what makes me me, which is all great to hear from you guys. I think, as I said in last month, I'm really proud to have my disability because it is what makes me who I am. I am in my own right able body because I've been born with my disability, so I don't actually know any different. And also with the amount that I've actually achieved quite early on at the age of 26, I'm really proud, and actually a lot of that is due to the fact that I've been given those opportunities that I probably wouldn't have had I've had my disability. So question for this month was being on the topic of inclusion and the Commonwealth Games is: what type of sport would you like to try if it was fully inclusive and accessible to you? So comment in and let us know so that we can include it in next month's podcast. So thanks guys for listening to all of that. I hope you really enjoyed it and enjoyed listening to what Mark had to say about his sport, especially with the Commonwealth Games coming up. Tune in for the next one, and in the meantime I hope you have a good week. See you later.